Before we start again, David Brownlee suggested, he's been getting some questions, a lot of excitement about our two online resources, the Greater Philadelphia Geohistory Network and the Philadelphia Architects and Buildings. When you walk right out here into the stairwell here, you will see a little rack on the table there underneath the mirror. These cards are there. They'll give you information about how to find them. They're also downstairs. You'll find them all over the building. So grab yourself one of these cards. If you wanted to play with them while you're here, there is a kiosk in the reading room with a little laptop. Can't be used to do your own emails, but you can use it to either search our library system or look at either one of these. And Jill, raise your hand back there. Our librarian is in the reading room today when she's not here handing out papers, and can help provide answers too. Also, if you think you want any cards to write down questions for this coming session, raise your hand. And I think, Jill, would you be willing to pass them around? Right before I introduce our moderator for our next panel, Paul Steinke has been wonderful. We've been collaborating with the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia this season on their speaker series, and he wanted to highlight, in light of the conversations we have been hearing, our the final two sessions in this series this fall. So Paul.
Thank you very much, Beth, and good morning, everyone. Once again, Paul Steinke from the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia. Our two remaining talks in our fall speaker series, which is a collaboration with the Athenæum, as Beth said. The next one is Tuesday at 6 p.m., and it's going to be Dr. Aaron Betsky, who has written a book called Don't Build, Rebuild. And it is an impassioned case for aggressive adaptive reuse of buildings. It's a fascinating book. It's so fascinating that it's been checked out of the library here. So if you have it, please, can I have it back for a minute? But Aaron is the former director of the Cincinnati Art Museum and also used to run the architecture program at Taliesin. He's a fascinating speaker. I've seen this talk twice. If you haven't seen it, I hope you'll join us. Tickets are available on the Preservation Alliance website, and I believe on the Athenæum website. And it will be in this room at 6 o'clock on Tuesday. And then, since Christina just spoke about her work with Kevin Block, they will be here on Tuesday, December 9th to talk more about that oral history archive project. And I believe will be giving us some audio sneak previews of people like Henry Magaziner and Hy Myers and the other ones that they've recorded. And that is December 9th at 6 o'clock, again in this room, and again, tickets available on our websites. So please join us, and thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Paul, as you know, if you know Paul and the work that he does with the Preservation Alliance, are just forces in this city in ensuring that we are taking preservation seriously. So thank you for all you do, Paul. And this is a sign of our continuation at the Athenæum of what I said was one of Roger's traits of a good leader, is finding the people to partner with and the organizations to partner with. And we are thrilled that so many of the partnerships that we have with organizations like the Preservation Alliance allow us to bring amazing programming to you so that you can leave here today and just come back in a couple of days. We have a cot upstairs if anybody just wants to stay here, so that you can spend your whole day at the Athenæum every day. And so thank you, Paul. So our next, you received little handouts. Did anybody, if you needed a card to take notes, did anybody need a card to take your notes? No, okay. We expect lots of questions this time. Our next panel is Paper, Paint, and Preservation, Innovation and Authenticity in Material Culture and Research. And moderating this is Catharine Dann Roeber, who's Director of Academic Affairs and Associate Professor of Decorative Arts and Material Culture for the Winterthur Program in American Material Culture. She also serves as executive editor of Winterthur Portfolio, a journal of American material culture. Her work in cultural heritage, decorative arts, and material culture studies includes exhibitions, public programs, teaching, mentoring, and community collaboration. She authored selections for an upcoming Newberry Library exhibition on early modern printing on fabric, and we are delighted that she agreed to moderate this panel, which you will find has people who have all worked intimately, not only with Roger, but also on the Athenæum's building. So please welcome our next panel.
Just a brief note on the slides, which will be rotating behind me as I'm speaking. The first 10 or so slides relate to my intro remarks, and then you'll move into seeing bigger versions of the images that you have in your packet that we handed out. So you can enjoy the large-scale version, and then as we're talking, we'll refer to the handout that you have so you can see the thumbnail and understand what we're talking about. Okay. So, good morning, and thank you again to everyone here at the Athenæum staff who've welcomed us so wonderfully, and to fellow speakers. I've really been enjoying these great conversations, and it's making me want to quit my job and just come and get back to research on first period Philadelphia. So, also thank you to Gail and to Roger's daughters for being here, and also for McNeil Funds and the other support for this wonderful conference. So, like many in the room, when we've been noting this, as we've in the previous conversations, I'm really thankful for Philly institutions, which one of my first exposures to places that we're talking about today was in middle school. During my spring break, I came and stayed with someone who lived very close to where we're standing today, and I was in 8th grade, and I was sent out each day with an itinerary of historic sites that I should go see on my own, and this had been set up for me, and one of the places that I first visited here was the Athenæum. And I was enchanted with it, if a little nervous, to be walking up to such an austere building as an 8th grader. My daughter's in 9th grade now. I can't imagine sending her out on her own to go to all of these wonderful places. So I lived in Michigan, I grew up in Michigan, and then when I started graduate school, I went on a walking tour during the first week of the Winterthur Program that I also was in with Bernie Herman, another large character in Philadelphia history and architecture, who we've also lost within the last year. And he walked us around, and he just enchanted me with the landscape of Philadelphia and the everyday buildings. And I was hooked. So for a class, I decided I would do a project that was an entire survey of first period buildings that do not stand anymore in Philadelphia, which is hard to do in a semester, and of course it was more cursory than anything, but I came here. This is one of the key sources that I used looking at that time at the physical files, the things that we've been talking about. By the time I was working on my dissertation, the PAB existed and the digital resources were there, and what a change. But I'm sure I looked at files that were compiled by some of you in the room and others. And what that really taught me, by having the presence of Roger Moss here, Bruce's help, and other folks, and really that attention to detail, what I was seeing in all of those files, and what later on you see, of course, in the digital resources, is how important detailed research is to understanding the big picture. And so I benefited greatly and continue to benefit greatly from all the work in sort of the Roger Moss way of approaching buildings. I think one of the main takeaways that we've all been talking about here today is that attention to detail tells a larger human story of either individuals or communities or institutions. And I think Roger Moss was such an important part of instilling that in us in the fields of studying the built environment and, as we're going to be talking about, interiors and architecture, but also very particularly here in Philadelphia. So our session is titled Paint paper, paint, and preservation, innovation and authenticity in material culture research. And we're sort of moving inside the buildings a little bit more than we have been talking about so far. And I just wanted to say, I'm always asked, what is material culture? People who, even sort of do things that might relate to that always want to ask. And I like to say that I teach, I edit a journal with those words in it, I mentor, I'm a lifelong learner, but it's really hard to define. I tell our students, you're going to spend 2 years of your life complicating what that means and complicating that definition, and by doing your own work, your own interdisciplinary work, you're going to figure out what that definition is for yourself and what your methods and what your approach will be. So that's not really a satisfactory thing. So the through line that I like to say is material culture is centered on the study of people and their physical surroundings. And you're seeing some great examples of that here. Was that the end? Okay, no. Okay, there we go. So that could be buildings, objects, archives, landscapes, even the more ephemeral things like food and sound can be material culture. We also then, that's the stuff of what we do, but the methodologies of what we do, often in material culture, are so rigorously interdisciplinary. So at Winterthur, we tend to start with an object when we have it, but we don't always have that. So of course you have to have that rigorous documentary and listen to oral histories and all the other things that exist for us when we don't have the physical thing. But there was an image earlier that showed people doing things like microscopy or other scientific analysis. There's the close looking, getting underneath furniture or looking carefully at a piece of ceramic. There's also the experimental archaeology and making and understanding that through doing. We had an image in there of, it's actually one of the last places that uses tissue for true tissue transfer printing on ceramics rather than the decal method. And by seeing that, it really drives it home more than just someone talking about it to you. So all of those things are core to early professional training at Winterthur, where I am, and other programs, like the programs that Roger Moss and others in the room are involved with. One of the things that I think Roger really knew was that training and mentoring and teaching, and this was just spoken about in the last panel, allows this flourishing, not only of the hard data that may be good or bad, as we were talking about, even a bad report can be helpful, but also the big stories that we want to tell. We need a body of people working on this, not just one people, to be doing this good work. Just seeing where we are here. But to what end? And I wanted to look back, and I did look back, at Roger Moss's 1972 dissertation to see what he was up to. And I love the introduction of people's dissertations. It doesn't matter who you are. They always are very there's a little bit of posturing that occurs with them, a little bit of articulating what you're going to do. He was already working here at the Athenæum, but not as the director yet when this was submitted. But we've already mentioned this before. Some of the problems that he was trying to solve, he said, with the exception of one unpublished doctoral dissertation, and this was after a long paragraph of what people had not done, of course framing his own work, without one unpublished doctoral dissertation, now 20 years out of date, America has no equivalent to H.M. Colvin's Biographical Dictionary of English Architects, 1660 to 1840. So we've seen that problem and how he went on with his career to solve it. He also, this humanistic approach, the having people at the core of studying things, is something that is very well articulated in his ideas in 1972 that I think carried throughout all of the work we've been talking about here. As he was talking about the master builders that he was going to be studying, he's articulating why he's not doing measured drawings and doing some of these other things that should be done. but that this is really looking at the people and uncovering the people, not as just a general populace, but saying that there were nuances within this community. That's some of the education images and the transfer printing at the end. Those are some of the first classes at Winterthur. So what he said was that physically, Philadelphia will never really be in focus in this dissertation. I have kept men, not buildings, in the foreground. And I think that's really interesting with that early focus on the people. And as you go on, oh yeah, that was perfect timing there. You can see that the books, of course, became, that storytelling continued. It continued by that deep analysis of the tax records, of the data that's available, of looking at buildings that some existed, some did not. And that storytelling continued with, of course, this beautiful trio of books where there was a visual story that was being told alongside the written component that was deeply grounded in the research from years of his own work, of other scholars, and of students. That book, Historic Houses of Philadelphia, was a true inspiration to me. I think the walking around the streets and then seeing these works that were publicly accessible and beautiful create that appreciation that we need to have people want to come to the fields that we're studying. So one of the things about that book and those trio of books is, we've noted this before, are those beautiful images which carry us inside to see the color of interiors, to see how people were living, to see recreated spaces. And that was all based on, in many of those houses that you see in those books, deep research and storytelling and deep understanding of the nuances of paint and wallpaper and buildings and other things that make up that physical fabric of everyday life for people of all different walks of life. So I'm very excited with our panel today to have three people who are going to be coming to the stage who were deeply influenced in various ways by Roger's work, through collaboration, through teaching, who have studied things, or have made a career, I should say, of studying paint. We have Frank Welsh. We also have with us Laura McCoy of Laura McCoy Designs, who has done extraordinary work with wallpapers, including in this building that we're standing in. And we also have Ron Koenig, who has worked with buildings and sculpture and the built environment and bringing those back to life in so many different ways. When they come up to the stage, I'm going to be asking them to explain a little bit more about their own backgrounds and about how they knew Roger. So I think we will do that at this time. Don't want to fall off the stage. That would be an inauspicious beginning. So, all right, so we'll start with our first question, which is, how did you know Roger? And sharing a little bit about your interactions with him throughout your career. And we'll start with Frank Welsh for that.
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank everyone here at the Athenæum for inviting me to participate in the symposium to honor our friend, Roger Moss. Answering the question, how did I know Roger? Well, I had so many memories, so many thoughts, that I thought I'd better write down all of them. Otherwise, trying to ad lib, I might just forget. So, pardon me while I read what I wrote. I first met Roger in the early 1970s while I was working at Independence National Historical Park. That was when I became aware of his growing fascination with the stark architectural paints, finishes, and colors, an interest that soon became a major focus in his career. His many publications, lectures, and the remarkable collection of paint ephemera he built and that we see exhibited all around us in this room today are a testament to that passion. Shortly after I began my consultancy, specializing in the investigation and analysis of historic architectural paints and colors, Roger engaged me to work here on the Athenæum. He was, in fact, one of my earliest clients. That project led to many collaborations, including lectures, publications, and research. With lectures, the first one was here in this room with the Victorian Society in America. And the second one was a memorable one in Bristol, Tennessee, and that included Gail. And another one was in Cape May, New Jersey, that included John Milner. With publications, the first was Century of Colors, and the next one was Paint in America. For research, he encouraged me to apply for the Peterson Fellowship. I did, and it was accepted. My extensive research focused on paints, pigments, and colors of 18th century American buildings, the results of which were published as a chapter in Paint in America. Over the years, Roger continually encouraged me to donate my reports to the Athenæum. He saw value in preserving the documents of this kind of work. I followed his advice and contributed my material over time. So this year, after closing my business after more than 50 years and over 1,700 projects nationwide, I donated all of my files, papers, samples, and related materials to the Athenæum's collection. I am deeply gratified that everyone here supported that decision unanimously. You know, Roger and I often met for lunch or dinner, whether at home or out somewhere, always sharing stimulating and wide-ranging conversations. In all, Roger and I shared a friendship that lasted more than 50 years. I deeply admired his intelligence, his vision and leadership, his refined aesthetic sense, and above all, his generosity. I miss him greatly, and I know we all do today. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Laura?
I met Gail, and by association Roger, at Brunswick and Fee launch. It was a launch for wallpaper collection with the SPNEA. Some people know that, but now it's called Historic New England. They did that to us. Anyway, then it was the SPNEA, and they had done a historic document wallpaper collection, and I was there attending. I was working in the field as a young stylist, and I was working with the Hobe Irwin Editions product line, which had been recently acquired by my then employer, Ellie Carpenter and Company. This collection was an important resource for early, more accurate period wallpapers used by interior designers from the 1930s on. I could do a whole lecture on this company, and it's fascinating, but not today. Okay, so Roger and Gail were concerned about the continuing availability of the wallpapers to museum house clients and the preservation and documentation of the archival resources of this company. As head stylist for this product line, I was responsible for the development of the wallpaper collections. I knew the art of wallpaper design in the retail market, but their input was invaluable to train me to become a more informed and effective archivist.
And then we have Ron, who is actually one of our students who is on the stage here. So,
like many here, I know, I met Roger Moss when I took this class in documentation and archival research at Penn. And, that was in the fall of 1991. I was 31 and I was one of the oldest students in the program. Before Penn, I had trained as a decorative painter, and also I had worked exposing decoration in both the Ohio State Capitol and Michigan State Capitol. I'm from Michigan. Not too far from Ohio. So I thought I understood quite a bit about historic architecture, but I didn't. I didn't. I remember walking out of my first class with Roger and thinking, wow, I'm going to learn a lot here. But I had no idea how important the research and documentation skills that he gave me about buildings, that they would inform every single project I'd work on for the next 34 years. I learned from Roger that the only way to truly understand a building is to find and document and understand every single piece of it that you can. And that's the opportunity often, because the building often isn't going to get another opportunity. So we're it. Following Roger's lessons, I do a very deep dive into every building that I write a proposal for. It makes my wife crazy. No, she says I'm obsessive, and I say, no, I'm just thorough. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of effort, but something that Roger mentioned to me one time is, when I told him what I wanted to do was, well, why would anybody hire anybody who didn't know more about the building than the owner that knew? And that was huge. So it's that, but also, I don't want to make mistakes. And I'm going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And there's going to be a lot that I don't know about a building. But to limit that, understanding the building before you get into it, and before you even write, before you even go into it deeply, puts you way ahead of the game and allows you to stay on track and schedule and a whole lot of other things. So for example, I wrote a recent proposal for Detroit's 1928 Scarab Art Club, and it's 142 pages long, has 108 images in it. It's not the biggest one I've done by any means.
Oh, good.
It includes material documentation on the building and each thing that we're hoping to work on, a biography for the architect, 3 biographies for artists and sculptors who created pieces for its interior, also an in-depth examination of Victor Toothaker. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him. He was the head, one of the main head electrical design, lighting fixture designers at Roycroft Workshops. And he actually lived in Detroit at one point, which is something that I discovered. I know the person who hired me, who's actually a curator at the Detroit Institute of Arts, didn't have any idea. And it wasn't a matter of proving myself, it's a matter of informing as much as I can, too, and sharing that. So, research and documentation, like I said, take a lot of time, but they really are worth it. I get most of the projects that I bid on, and people have told me, if you're getting that many, you're not charging enough.
Right.
That's not true. I mean, because I become an expert on these buildings, and it is, I feel like I owe that to the building itself, and I owe it to the people who are on my crew, and I owe it certainly to the owners, and I also owe it to the people who built it, the architects, the people who paid for it maybe 100 years ago, all of that. No stress. That's not a lot. No, but, so
that's just part of the thousands of things that I learned from Roger. And I can never thank him enough. And Gail, who is also a dear friend of mine, to talk about one of them is you know,
To talk about them both.
You're talking about both of them. That's how it works. And I love them both dearly. I still love them both dearly. And it's based on this, not just the work we do together, but having a relationship that spanned this many years. I know I'm taking a long time. I'm almost done, I promise. But you know, I had this relationship that started out, I was a dumb student, and I came in and I took Gail's class and Roger's class. Gail's class was in American Interiors. And so I was a student. And then Gail pretty quickly, she involved me in a project here in Philadelphia, and it energized me. It scared me too, but it energized me. And so we became colleagues. And then we became friends. And that is the best relationship you can have. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we've talked a lot about how Roger's been shaping the field, and we talked a lot about it in our pre-meetings, and in particular with material culture by asking these very specific questions of object-centric questions and valuing things. And I think that's really important too, not just saying this looks nice, but we need to get it right to tell the right story, or at least put forth a supposition that is the best informed one that we can, based on analysis of paint, wallpaper, textiles, furnishings, etc. And the validity of doing that is something that was articulated very well through that work. So I asked each of the folks here to reflect a little bit about how that approach informed and influenced their work, and Frank is going to talk to us first about that. And if you go to the back of your packet with the large pages, if you see a chart, Frank will be referring to that chart as he's telling us a little bit about how he was influenced and how his work unfolded. I love the sound of all the paper.
So the archaeology of historic paints and finishes, I've learned over time, for me, consists of 5 separate components. The first is document research, both written and photographic. The second is the physical investigation of an exterior or an interior. Define the locations that exhibit the very best evidence. The next component is the actual sample collection of that best evidence, using a variety of tools to collect samples of various sizes, from very small to sometimes actual elements like a window trim or even a door. Somebody actually sent me a door from their building out in the Midwest. And then the fourth is the lab analysis. That's the microscopy of the collected samples. And for that, we'll refer to the flow chart after the 5th component, which is the report, which is the interpretation of the data based on the lab analyses to present the findings and conclusions of the effort. So those are the 5 components. Now, if you do have the flow chart in front of you, which I created, you'll see 2 orange highlighted boxes at the top. The stereo microscope and the polarizing light microscope. Those are the 2 major tools in the analytical process. The stereo microscope is more of a low-powered microscope, and its magnification can range anywhere from 10 power all the way up to 70 power. And examining a paint sample with it, the light source is referred to as reflected light. The light is shining down on the sample that's on your microscope stage. Whereas with the polarizing light microscope, the light source is transmitted light. It comes from the bottom and it goes up through the specimen that's on a glass slide. If you ever had a biology course, maybe you looked at specimens under the microscope that was on a glass slide. Okay. So since the workhorse in the analytical process is really the stereo microscope, we'll look at that one in the middle, under the stereo microscope. When examining a sample in the lab, we'll look at initially the layers on the sample. Then we'll observe the colors of the paint layers. And we'll get a sense of the types of coatings that they are. And maybe the appearance. All right, those are the general categories for the initial examination. Whereas with the polarizing light microscope on the right, the primary categories of investigation involve determining the vehicle of the coating. The pigments, a very important part of analyzing historic paints. And then finally at the bottom, if dealing with wallpapers, the fibers that were used to make that paper, all right? And then far over on the right, I've highlighted the box called photomicrographs. Sometimes it's important to photographically document what we're looking at, okay? So we'll go back to the stereo microscope and under layers. What are we going to observe? Not only the number of layers, but also the substrates. Is it a plaster substrate, a wood substrate, or even metal, like a metal cornice or tin ceiling? And then the colors. Once isolating the, let's say the layer, if it's paint, of historic significance, and exposing enough area of that that looks like best evidence for examining, we get into the color matching. And the color match is a visual evaluation matching to a paper color standard, whether it's a paint company color chart, color fan deck, or what is most often used, the Moncel color system. And then for types of coatings, the possibilities that we will look at with paints are whether we're looking at a sizing or, and this is the pink box to the right of types of coatings, a stain or a varnish, a glaze, or a metallic paint. And then going down below that, the wallpapers. Is that the coating that we're working with? With appearance, we'll want to observe whether it's a decorative finish, like graining or marbling, like you see in this room, marbleized pilasters and grained trim. Or is there evidence of stenciling or even stippling? And then finally, it's the sheen, meaning the gloss or the matte appearance of that coating, and if it has a texture. Now, the polarizing light microscope comes into play, for example, if I observe that the original finish of the paint sample that I'm looking at is white. And I ask myself, how white is this? Is it a yellowish white or is it a pure white? Well, if I find that it's a yellowish white, I'm going to say, is this a lead paint that is yellowed over time? Because that's what happens with lead paints in a linseed oil medium. Or was it tinted? Is it intentionally a yellowish white? So that's when I can take a very small sample of that paint film with a very sharp little tungsten needle and put that on a glass slide in a mounting media and put a little cover slip on top of it and take it over to the polarizing light microscope and look for either the lack of coloring pigments like iron oxides or like sienna or rhomb or something like that, or do I actually see coloring pigments? So that is how that tool can be used. And for media, I could go back and take another sample, put it on a glass slide, and crush it under a cover slip, and do a microchemical analysis of it, because certain reagents will react in a certain way in contact with oil paints or with water-based paints, like a calcimine paint, which is something made with glue and chalk. It was very popular wall coating in the throughout time, basically. With white pigments, it's sometimes very important to be able to distinguish between the three principal white hiding pigments that were used to make paint: white lead, zinc white, and titanium dioxide. And then for coloring pigments, it's important to know, along with the whites, the first date of commercial availability. So that if we're trying to date a paint layer, we can, if we identify some of these, we'll be able to know that this paint layer couldn't have existed before a certain time. And that becomes important, not only with architectural paints, but also with easel paintings, fine art, to verify ages or authentication, right? And with fibers associated with wallpapers, which also have paint on them to create designs, we'll want to see whether, with the polarizing light microscope, is it a rag paper, which is a combination of cotton and flax, or is it a wood pulp paper? Now that's important because wood pulp papers weren't commercially available until after the mid-1800s. So that takes care of the flow chart. Now let me give you one example of a project that I worked on that involved only the stereo microscope. It did not involve the polarizing light microscope. And we're sitting in that example, this room. The colors that you see on the walls, on the ceiling, the grays, the pinks, are the originals. And they've been restored following my work with Roger way back in the 1970s. I have other examples, one concerning the authentication or verification of the age of a painting that someone brought to me. And the other is an actual physical architectural object that a client brought in to my office. I can stop here so that the others can participate. And we can come back to those two if time permits, because I think you'll find them very fascinating.
Yeah, we can't underscore enough. I mean, I go to lots and lots of historic sites throughout a year with students, see some of our fine hosts in the audience here, and so much of the time, the attention to the detail with the painted treatments, not just on the architecture, but the furniture, things like that. It helps us understand, of course, what the world looked like to someone. If we look at a piece of stripped shaker furniture that had its paint taken off because it appealed to a mid-century modern marketplace and don't understand the vividness of what their lives were like, we're really missing out on understanding that human component. So, that attention to detail that helps us tell the big story is just so important. So thanks for taking us through that. But Laura, would you like to share something about your influences from approaches?
Is this number 2?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just looking at the things. This is number 2. Okay. Roger was associated with the Sam Dornsife and Victorian Society of America collection. Sam had a collection of wallpapers, and it was stored and ultimately donated to the Athenæum of Philadelphia's collection. I became a student of both Roger and Sam in the study of period wallpaper and its early production methods. I was actively working in the retail field, and I was using one of these methods, surface printing, for the reproduction of the Hobe Irwin Editions wallpapers, using antique brass and felt rollers on Waldron machines that dated to the late 1800s. I was living the dream and sharing the experience with them. So they were teaching me, and I was actually on site using the things they were teaching me about. So it was a very wonderfully reciprocal arrangement. And Roger was very excited about this, and Gail. And I'll tell a little bit more about that later. Go ahead.
Great. Ron.
So after visiting the Athenæum, I actually went through and saw a lot of the books on there were catalogs and manuals on paint, wallpaper, linoleum, interior decoration, and I began to use them on a regular basis pretty quickly once I went into private practice. But while I was still here at Penn, and actually for a while after I left, I was buying books because I found them available. And then I talked to Roger and Gail, and I said, look, I really love buying these books, and I really want to have, for me, finding a home for something that is useful is really important. I don't know why, just how I am, I guess. But so I became basically a book scout, and I was buying books, and I was giving to them to the Athenæum, and they went into the collection, and there are 31 books here that I was reminded of that today. I couldn't remember how many it was. I have a huge collection now. My collection is, I don't know, probably 400 to 700 books on everything from plumbing and catalogs for companies, different companies that made plaster decoration that was then applied. I go on, and I don't want my kids to have to deal with that when I'm not there. So guess where they're going to go?
Yeah.
If they're going to go, if the Athenæum is interested, because it really, I would feel so good to know that they had a home here and that people use them. That's the part of it, is that when something's in a drawer, for a long time, it might as well not exist at all. And those things inform us hugely. And they're, as source material, I've used them time and time again. And I also have a lot of manuals for people who are becoming professional. So it was actually from the skilled trades where they're training people and bringing them up. And those books are really useful because it also tells you when, for example, they stop using whitewash. And it talks about when they stop using calcimine. And then it comes back because there's a resurgence. All those things are really important. So I want those books to be here. I have a whole bunch of other stuff I could say, but I want to keep going too. So please.
Well, we were talking a lot about, again, continuing on the thread of this documentary research and the process and this back and forthing that you're referring to, Laura, of this, it's a reciprocal relationship. You learn something, someone else tells you something, and then you're learning together.
Yes.
And these aha moments that can happen when that occurs. Frank, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about a painting project or
Sure, okay. About 10 years ago, a gentleman from Michigan called me, said, I have a painting. I just bought it on eBay from a seller in England. And the seller marketed it as a copy, a 17th century copy of Peter Bruegel the Elder's children's games. So he bought it, he paid a lot of money. And he said, I just want to verify that it is from the 17th century, Frank. Can you help me? And I said, yes, I think I can. So he drove it to my office from Michigan, out in Bryn Mawr. And it came into the office with its frame on, and I said, let's take the frame off and see if there's an area that's very protected that I can take a sample from. That would be a good paint to analyze for pigment composition, because if there are any pigments in this paint that post-date the 1700, then, we'll know a lot. So I found a sample of blue-colored sky paint in the upper right-hand corner, and I took it to the stereo microscope and looked at it, and prepared it for mounting a tiny sample of it on my glass slide and under a cover slip, and took it over to the polarizing light microscope. And the first thing I wanted to look for was the presence of white lead, since white lead would be, in the 17th century, the only white hiding pigment available to make a paint. And secondly, I wanted to find out what the blue pigment was that made the color of the paint it was. And then if it wasn't white lead, what white pigment was used. So, as it happened, my first observation was, there's no white lead in this paint. That's clue number one. The second observation was, well, then what is the white pigment? Could it be zinc white? And I looked for physical or optical characteristics of zinc oxide, which, if you can envision a boomerang, the curved shape of a boomerang, or if you ever played jacks when you were a kid, the many prongs of a jack, So there are certain forms of zinc oxide that look like a broken form of a jack. I said, well, I don't see any of those. Well, what do I see? I see tiny, tiny, tiny little white pigment particles that I can hardly see. I thought, uh-oh, this looks more and more like titanium dioxide to me. So then I looked over at the blue, and I thought, well, if it's pre-1700s, it can't be Prussian blue, because that is a pigment that was artificially prepared after 1700. Well, it could be lapis lazuli, natural ultramarine. And sometimes there's some forms of this that can look the same. So I was pretty familiar with both because I wrote kind of a groundbreaking article on how to distinguish the two in the special form of Prussian blue in the Journal of the Association, the AIC, Institute of Conservation. So I was able to identify the pigment as Prussian blue. So on three counts, I knew that this man had purchased a painting that wasn't what the seller said it was. So I conveyed that to the client, and I said, if you want more proof, let me do a little more research, and I'll take some more samples and we'll use my scanning electron microscope with X-ray technologies and do an elemental analysis of the sample. And I did. It confirmed my findings. It found titanium, iron, which is a component of Prussian blue, and no white lead. So again, I confirmed that to him, and he was greatly disappointed that it wasn't what the seller said it was. So I said, what are you going to do now? He said, well, I don't think I can do anything because eBay has a policy that if you don't return something within 30 days, you're out of luck. So he said, I just have to keep it, but I really love it. And I have one more that we can come back to later.
Laura, I know you have some aha moments that relate
Yes,
to
yes.
this building again that we're
Yes,
seeing.
yes. As a result of meeting Roger and Gail and my disappointment with the wallpaper collection's accuracy and poor documentation that I found in the retail market where I was then working, I decided to found my own company in 1987, which is Laura McCoy Designs, Inc., with the express purpose of creating the most accurate wallpaper reproductions for museum houses and private clients. I did, I have, I still am, and I'm very active with a lot of current clients. And also, my daughter, Emily McCoy, is now partnering for the future, okay? So, in 1988, Roger went into a licensing agreement with the Imperial Wall Covering Company to produce the Athenæum of Wallpaper Collection for Katzenbach and Warren. I don't know if anyone remembers them. I've got a few nods there. Yes, we are of a generation that remembers these people. That was the product line. Unfortunately, it no longer exists, nor does Imperial, which is weird because they were huge. We used to call them the Book of the Week Club. You know, they really were producing more than one wallpaper collection a week, if you can imagine, during my younger years. Anyway, Laura McCoy Design ASD is listed on the inside cover as a team member for this collection. This collection in your handout is number 13. You see there three, it looks like this on the bottom. You see 3 inserts from this wallpaper collection, which they have in this building, and I thought they might have it around for people to look at. That was a hint. You might get it out so people can flip through it. Anyway, I was the stylist responsible for the artwork, color development, and design of this book. In those days, every design and colorway was still hand-painted in gouache, which is the original way that all wallpaper from the beginning was developed, which meant there were over 150 paintings produced by me and my team to do this wallpaper collection. This art technique, as I said, was traditional design from the beginning, from the 1770s until the early 21st century. So this wallpaper collection was done in the original way, no digital. Now the art is typically painted digitally, which we do now. The items number 14 through 17 on your sheet are showing the Sully Poe ashlar. While working on the Athenæum collection, most of the things reproduced were in good condition. Roger chose to reproduce a very degraded sample of fragmentary evidence that was in the archive that came from the Thomas Sully House in Philadelphia. Upon discussing this with my associate Frank Welsh, I found out that he had revealed this same paper from the Poe House in Philadelphia, and we have those nasty pictures that are of picture number 15 shows his work in the Edgar Allan Poe House here in Philadelphia, which he found the very same paper. Okay, so my aha moment, I'm getting to it. This was, in order to artistically render this design, I was given that really bad photo to work from. It's in the 14 through 17. It's the really nasty looking thing that's like half the pattern, okay? And I had this bad photo to puzzle over, and it had come, it had not been recorded by me. The photograph had been provided by the Athenæum. And the clue was that Roger kept referring to this design as an ashlar. Okay, an ashlar, and I was young, and I learned what an ashlar was at that point, and when you look it up, you find it refers to a stone block or brick pattern. And when I looked at the evidence as given to me with the orientation it was, I didn't see it. I was like, I didn't know what the heck I was dealing with. So one day while I was really frustrated with my developmental efforts, I took a break from my studio to watch the 1933 version of Little Women with Katharine Hepburn as Jo and Joan Bennett as the youngest sister, Amy. Now you see a picture of her, and she's got a sign that says, "I am very ashamed of myself," which is kind of how I felt at the time when I saw that wallpaper behind her, and I basically screamed and ran up to my studio. My husband thought I was nuts, and I realized that what I was seeing was a very decorative ashlar, and the photograph they gave me was this way, and it should have been that way. And I went and I looked and I said, oh my God, all of it is here. And I have everything I need to do an absolutely accurate reproduction of this wallpaper from the fragment. So that was my aha moment. And the set design for this movie was done by, guess who? Hobe Irwin, who I mentioned earlier, who was a famous New York interior designer who did these period wallpapers that Gail was in love with, and for good reason. And he was a famous Hollywood set designer, including Gone with the Wind, okay? Like that's that other lecture. Anyway, so that was it.
Did you want to share any aha moments?
I have them all the time.
I know.
I do.
Yeah.
Because we do a lot of uncovering of decoration. Because I get historic photographs and I'm told, oh, these are prime. These are right after the building was built and they weren't. And we find other things. But that's why we keep looking too. Mm-hmm. When we were working in the Turner Dodge house, which we're going to get to in a little bit with the papers there, some of the papers there, we were working on the grandmother's room, and I found traces of doing sampling, I found traces of paint that were proved to be water soluble, and they were a very soft green. And I uncovered a section of it, and we realized it was also what Frank was talking about, which is a water-based calcimine, which is pigment, glue, water. It's also known as a bubble finish because it has really good opacity, but it's dead flat. And I didn't have a good reference point for that. Yes, actually, calcimines were the most common paint in the United States for a very long time, but they are very sensitive. If you put a wet hand on it, a sweaty hand, or a child's sweaty hand, it will actually, you'll damage it. Often used on ceilings. Well, this room, it was the walls, and I had only found small areas. So how am I going to figure out what it looks like? I mean, I can reproduce it, which I did, and I got the color, so I was very comfortable with it. And then I turned to Fred Mayer's book on painting. It's called Painting Plain and Decorative, and he goes into great detail about calcimines and talks about how they look. But there was also a photograph that was associated with it, and that there's a flatness, but at the same time there's sort of it's flat, but it's not. It actually has a shimmer across it. Areas that are darker and lighter. It's really very beautiful. So that's what we used in the grandmother's house, and it's still there in the Turner Dodge house. And so it allowed me to actually put this paint, and that was very difficult to know exactly what it looked like on and be comfortable with that. And so it was actually Fred Mayer's book that was my aha. Okay, how am I going to do? Oh, well, that's how I'm going to do it. We are many of us are working by ourselves, and stratigraphic analysis that utilizes, he used the term archaeological. We use the archaeological method, which means that the lowest thing, closest to the substrate, are the oldest, and as you move up to the top, they're later. But we do that with a lot of things, and we do it anyway. I really appreciate everything that Frank does, and he's famous. So.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about, Frank sort of led us to thinking about some of the technologies that can help inform the work that's being done, but Laura's also talking about the traditional techniques of, hundreds of gouache paintings. So this combo of using very traditional methods alongside new technologies is something that all of you have explored. And I think for the interest of time, maybe if we narrate through some of the projects, because we've got the Rutherford B. Hayes House, and just to talk a little bit more about some of these projects that you all, in various arrangements, have been working on, and sort of where those sort of traditional and new technologies came together to help inform the projects.
Okay. Something wonderful happened in the year 2000. It was the millennium, right? We all remember that. It was 25 years ago, and now I can't believe it. But I started to get inquiries from museum houses who suddenly went back to their archives now that the 100-year mark had rolled over, and they went back and looked and said, well, these photos are really neat. Well, they're not, they could be useful, couldn't they? And their question to me was, could they? And my question was, yes, because now we had a technology that was computer scanning and digital ability to enhance these photos, okay? So Gail came to me, because I was her pet wallpaper person for good reason. She trained me herself, come on. Anyway, so she came to me with the Rutherford B. Hayes House, which we did, and it was an amazing house. I won't go into all of the things we did because we don't have time. I decided to focus on the red parlor. These are the images that are numbered 18 through 22, okay? And this was one of those situations where they had only photographs, no wallpaper fragments at all. All I had to work with was photos, okay? Now, they did have some evidence. They had paint analysis evidence. They had fiber and upholstery and carpet, which Gail was in charge of. She just, wallpaper was my thing. Anyway, but she would give me these wonderful letters and reports that said, okay, kid, this is what we got. And she'd send samples and everything. And it was called the Red Parlor, not because they painted the walls red, but because the draperies, the upholstery, the carpeting, those were the red things, okay? Because when I looked at her, I said, unless, if you look at the photograph on the left side of 19, you will see an elevation I created. On the left side is the original photographs, and on the right side is my wallpaper reproductions. Now, all I had was the left side, gang, okay? But we had evidence, and we had the photographs, and I made the border in number 21, as you can see, the lily border that was on the ceiling. It was this big in the photo, okay? So there was a lot of work to be done here. And in 21, there is a field paper. My nickname for that's the red field paper in the middle. I called that hamburger. The nickname for that was the hamburger pattern, because in the photograph, and unfortunately we don't have anything big so I can say, ooh, look, but in the photograph, it really looked like hamburger. But once I worked on it enough, I found a repeating pattern in that hamburger area, and I could see that it was actually a wallpaper that was being railroaded, running sideways around the ceiling, and I took an actual document wallpaper and I scaled it slightly to fit my evidence. So the evidence is accurate, but has been amended to what was scaled in the photograph. And you say, how do you know about the scale in the photo? How do you know that? That's nuts, all right? Well, how we know, if you look at number 22, you see that happens to be Jim Yates, who is the best wallpaper installer on the planet, and he is installing the wallpaper on the ceiling. And the reason we know what the scale of these things were is that the very industrious earlier wallpaper hangers, when they took all the stuff off the ceiling, they still had the pencil marks from the original installation, which was so exciting and such an aha moment, because then Gail was like, looky what we got, So she sent me the documented measurements, and I was able to scale these from the pencil marks on the ceiling from the original installers, which was great. And you can take other times if you want. I just want to go back just a second to number 13. That's the Athenæum collection. And Roger and Gail worked on that and gave all of their incredible knowledge on what should be chosen, what should be reproduced from here, all the colorways to be reproduced. It is the most accurately reproduced collection of wallpapers practically ever done, okay? And there was not one volume, because they loved us so much, we did too, okay? So it was really, really amazingly beautiful. And the first volume was shot in historic houses all around Philadelphia. Since we're so Philly-centric here, this is the thing. And those were obviously made possible by their associations with all of the historic museums and private homes in the area that were used for the room shots that these were taken from. So that's my thing. And I think I'm done on that section.
Yeah, so I think the Hickory Hill project was one that Frank first introduced you to, is that right? That was in the
No,
Georgia?
yes, actually,
Yeah.
bless Frank's heart, I'm telling you, colleagues, aren't they the best? I was this was not a job that I worked with Gail on. This was when I was doing, because I couldn't just live on only what she referred to me. I had to keep, the bills paid, so I was doing my own work as well. And some of the way I got that was through Frank, bless his heart. He was contacted by Tad.
She's going to talk about a house, a southern house in a small town
Thompson.
west of Augusta, only by a little bit, Thompson, Georgia.
Right.
And the man who contacted me originally wanted to know about the architectural coatings, but also he had a collection of wallpaper fragments attached to boards. And when he brought them up to my office from Georgia, I did the color analysis on them for him, and then I said, I think you need to now contact Laura McCoy.
Okay. So, and if you look at your images 24, that's after the 23, which was the finished red parlor for for Hayes. I have so many clients that start with H. I've got 3 of them right now. It's just driving us crazy. So anyway, this is Hickory Hill. That's the house. And up in the attic of that house is where they found the wallpaper samples, because we figured out that, and with your analysis to confirm age and stuff, we figured out that the granddaughters of the owners, and this was Tom Watson, he was a very important, he ran for president, anyway, so Tom Watson was a very important person, and it was the Watson Brown Foundation that owns Hickory Hill, which it was his house, circa 1900. And they went up in the attic as they were doing an amazing restoration, soup to nuts on this house. And up in the attic, they found all this wallpaper stuck on boards, on the bare wood. And they figured out that they had 2 granddaughters, and they had given them the end rolls of the wallpaper from the house, and they said, go play. And they ran upstairs to the attic, and they started sticking it willy-nilly all over, their playroom up in the attic. And then when you looked at them, they were still on the boards initially, and they said, we were talking about, how did they get to me? And they were saying, well, do you want the boards? And I'm like, no, I do not want the boards. Do not ship them here, please. But they needed to have an the interstep here was Sue Nash, who was an amazing paper conservator. And she's now retired, living happily somewhere on the West Coast. And she did a great job. She took the boards. They were shipped to her instead. I said, send them to Sue, send them to Sue. So she took the boards, and she took rice paper, and she traced the placement, which was very important, because these were not like, full great rolls. They were chunks, because they'd torn off over the years and stuff. So I kept saying, we have to keep these in order, gang, in order for me to know how to reconstruct these patterns. So, bless her heart, she made boards out of rice paper. She traced them, and then she carefully removed the fragments off the bare wood and glued them in place on the rice paper boards, rolled those up, and sent them to me. And that is what I worked from. And you can see number 25 is a strip of that rice paper board, and you can see some of the fragmentary evidence that I used to reproduce the finished design to the right.
Yeah, and that's also the back page of the packet has a little bit larger, because I felt like you really wouldn't be able to see the connection there.
The very back page looks like this.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this was typical of the fragmentary evidence that we were provided to work on this. Yeah. The yellow pattern on the right was sealing paper. It too had fragmentary evidence on a board. And number 27 is the final installed room set for this parlor suite. We did like 6 other rooms in the house, but we had to keep it limited.
Well, so we are running a little short on time, so I think, no offense to New Jersey, but I think let's pop over the Executive Mansion and maybe go to the St. Augustine project.
That's
Do you
fine.
want to introduce that site a little bit, Ron? And then
Sure, I'd love to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we can do that. And then I think we're going to collect the questions if there are any.
Can I
while we're
just, can I
Of
end?
course, please.
I would like to talk about my final example.
Sure.
Just very quickly. Now or after Ron?
Pardon?
Now or after Ron talks
Why
about?
don't you do yours and then Ron can talk about St. Augustine? That would be
all
great.
right. Very quickly. In 2012, two gentlemen, brothers, called me, told me they had an architectural fragment from the White House. And it was a plinth. And they said they had contacted William Seal in Washington, who's a noted authority on the history of the White House. And he went through his documents and he found a picture of the White House in the room called the Transverse Hall that illustrates this plinth. And this is, I think, what photograph is this?
Is it in there?
Is it in here?
No, we don't.
The letter. It's a letter that is in this packet.
Oh, I think it's on the back of the chart. Back of the chart.
The back of the chart? Okay. Why don't you turn to that? It might help.
I don't know. Probably weren't going to be able to read it.
Oh, yeah, well,
Okay, yeah. It's next to the last page. So you can see those historic photographs. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is because it illustrates the 5 components of the historic paints and finishes archaeology, all right? So it wraps it up. The brothers asked me if I could help them authenticate it as a White House object, along with the documentation, and I said yes. So they brought it to my office, and I took very selected samples from it, about 4 or 5, and I didn't use the polarizing light microscope for it. I just used the stereo microscope to look at the layer structure, all right? And to make it simple, I simply counted the number of finish coats on it,
Oh, wow.
all right?
Okay.
I counted 17,
Oh, man.
which in my experience is an excessive amount for a piece that was installed in 1815 by Madison and removed in 1902 when Roosevelt gutted the White House, if you remember that. The White House was totally bulldozed inside and reconstructed. The brothers told me that their relative had salvaged this one piece from the scrap heap and had given it to them. They had inherited it, okay? And the brothers wanted to get rid of it, and they thought maybe it had value. All right. So I then went to the history books and counted up how many terms there were in presidents between
Yeah.
Madison and
Sure.
Roosevelt. And as it worked out, I figured every 4 years with a new president, they repainted this space.
Yep.
So speculatively, mathematically, I came back and I said, yes, I think this is from the White House. That was in 2009. Well, they went away. They came back 2014 and said, Frank, can you write a letter summarizing your findings? Because we want to take it further now. I said yes. So I wrote this letter. You can read it later. They took this letter where I documented what I did, and they went to an auctioneer. The auctioneer was very interested in taking on the project with them. The auctioneer contacted the producers of a TV show called Strange Inheritance
Oh,
because these brothers inherited this piece.
right.
Strange Inheritance producers contacted me and said, can we come to your office and your lab and film you as part of our documentary? So that's the picture of me in your packet, because it was shown on Fox Business Network called Strange Inheritance, which I don't know whether it's still being shown, but it was very popular way back when.
That's great.
Okay, the auctioneer then put the plinth up for auction with a reserve of $25,000. It sold for $187,500.
Oh, my God. Okay.
Lucky brothers.
Yeah, boy. Yeah, you should have charged a percentage. Yeah.
Bully for them, that's
So that was a
Jeez.
very fun project to work on, and so that's it, okay?
I know,
Just quickly, maybe, if you
Yep,
just want
I
to
can
talk
do
about,
that.
because I think it's a cool site, the Wisconsin.
So if you look at
I
your,
could talk about both of them really quickly, really, I can.
Yep.
So if you go to 31 and 32, the photographs, that, the one on the left is a before and after of the outside of St. Augustine's Catholic Church. It was 1844. It was actually designed and constructed by Father Samuel Massa Kelly, who, I'm not going to go into great detail. He was Italian. He came over as a young man, and he actually built 28 churches that we knew of. This is a project that Gail is the connector. Gail is a person who brings people together to create great things. And this was a great project. We got there, the outside. I don't know if you can see it. It had been painted twice in its history. I talked to Gail. It's actually red pine boards that were very wide, very thick, and they were beveled every once in a while. And I was just scratching my head. And I called Gail. We talked about it. And she said, well, I think it may have been rusticated, which is painted to look like stone. Athenæum Jefferson's house. It happened in some other 18th century buildings, but not this period, which was interesting. So I went up in the eaves and I took paint samples, and I found that it was indeed a rusticated surface, which is you apply something that's sticky, and they used milk paint, and then they did a dash coat of sand on it that was actually brought from a specific place that made it look like the local sandstone a lot of the buildings are built of. So we replicated that. That's the outside, real quickly. Then we actually struck the joints so that it would look like stone. I did have somebody come up, I'm going to say this really quick too. I had somebody show up who was really angry because I love this building. I've been looking at it since I was a kid. You put stone on the outside of it. And I went, no, it's okay. And I couldn't see it that way because we had done the whole process. But
it worked. You did it right.
Well, I guess, yeah. But when he found out, he was just so happy. So that was great. Inside, Father Samuel Massa Kelly actually lived in the church in his own studio apartment, more or less. And while we were in there, I was doing some investigations, and we found this wallpaper. If you look at 36, that actually is my hand is actually holding the sample that we removed. The paper that's behind that is actually the paper that Ms. McCoy recreated, and you can see that it's really extraordinary. You can see a little bigger blow up of it on 32,
Right.
And then 33 is actually where I originally found it. The mock-up is 34 that Laura did. So
Yeah, that's typically how we present wallpaper artwork with the color tabs in the order of the laydown, those chips on the bottom. So that's the artwork.
I'm just going to talk for a second about, this really won't take very long, and thank you for your patience, by the way. 37 is actually the Turner Dodge House in Lansing, Michigan, which is where I lived for a long time, and I was asked to come in and work on the building. So that's the outside of the house. Major changes since it was constructed, but I'm not going to go into that. In the boys' room on the second floor, I started seeing evidence of that there was something red that was underneath one of the walls, and I suspected it might be paper. So I used a scalpel, and over about 4 or 5 days, I actually uncovered a section of it, and a lot of it was gone completely. So the red 38 is actually, and 39 are we left actually the original section of the wallpaper, and the wallpaper that Laura McCoy created is all around it in the room. And it's a stunning room, and it's one of the people's favorite rooms in the whole building. So,
And you also said, or somebody said, Was it you? Did they do the Christmas program?
Yes,
That's right.
They
do the Christmas
They have a lot of
program.
creepy dolls in there, but I'm not going to go into
A
that.
lot of creepy dolls and Christmas ornaments and stuff.
And Laura wanted me, because Laura, we work on different times, so we're sort of, I had never met Laura before
No.
a few
Now
days
we're
ago.
besties.
We had talked on the phone, we knew each other, we worked on a lot of projects together, it's very odd. If you look at 40 is actually a photograph of the split lath that was in that room. And lath was split because it gave rough surfaces, so when you plastered to it, it would create a key, but the roughness of the wood actually, of splitting it, held it in place. And so we actually left that too as part of sort of the record of what we found and what was originally there. So thank you again for your patience.
Yeah, I think we're at lunchtime.